Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I had been in an empty field in Elk Grove, California, getting some painting done. It was in October 2015 during the mid-afternoon. Then suddenly, I heard what can be called a sonic boom. I quickly looked up and tried to identify what had made this strange sound. I saw an aircraft, which was unusual for the area I was in. I came to the assumption that this was no ordinary aircraft. I went back to painting when I heard another sonic boom. It had done this 3 or 4 times before disappearing suddenly. Out of curiosity, I went to investigate the object, and that's when things got weird. I heard something rustling near some bushes. I froze in fear, waiting for the entity to reveal itself, camera ready. It jumped out of the bush snarling and sniffing. I snapped a photo and forgot to turn off the sound. It heard the noise and went to investigate. It got around 30 feet away from me and didn't notice me. Out of fear, I was ready to turn back and get out of there. But curiosity got the best of me. I knew of a local sewer access that I thought it could have tried to take shelter in, so I went and bought a flashlight and got my other camera. After what seemed about 200 yards of walking, I heard footsteps other than mine. I turned off the flashlight and yelled, "I have a knife and I'm not afraid to use it." Then I heard a roar and growl coming from the end of the tunnel. I froze in fear and dropped my flashlight. As it rolled back and forth, flickering on and off, I waited for it to stop moving. I stood there for several seconds. Then the next thing that I saw haunted me. It was a human, reptile creature staring at me with eyes that reflected the light from my flashlight. I snapped a photo added below, then I quickly started running until I was about a mile away from the area. I never went back. But for what I know, it could still be hiding in the sewers waiting. Any thoughts on the images?
I'm sure this story is unbelievable if you were not there, but it happened and is in fact only one of many bizarre occurrences in my life. This one is significant though because my friend was there as a witness to back me up. When I was in 7th grade, in 1989, my mom was transferred to Mobile, Alabama. My brothers and I used to skateboard, and we often skated at this concrete ditch a few blocks from my house. I estimate it was about 7 feet tall from the base of the ditch to the top at ground level. One day my friend Sam and I decided to follow the ditch into the woods to see where it led. We skated for quite a while along the bottom of the ditch, just following it as it went deeper into the woods and away from the houses. Eventually the ditch ended at a flat wall. There were 2 tunnels in the wall which continued forward. They were each maybe about 5 feet in diameter, with yellow horizontal bars in front of them. Well, the tunnels were pitch black and both of us stood silently there, trying to decide if we were brave enough to climb the bars and continue forward into the tunnels. After maybe 30 seconds, we suddenly heard a voice coming from the right tunnel. "Come inside," it said. We were both scared, and just frozen in place. Then more voices joined in. "Come inside, come join us," along with the sound of a shrill kind of reed instrument. We did not listen to the voices, but just stood there in place. Well, I guess these people realized that we weren't coming in, so they decided to come out. And the next part is pretty crazy. As we stood there, we saw 5 sets of glowing eyes inside that tunnel. They were moving up and down as though walking towards us. The glow was an intense whitish yellow. At this moment, there must have been a sudden break in my memory because the next thing I remember is 5 people standing in front of us outside of the tunnel. They appeared to be a family of 5, an adult male and female along with 3 children. All of them were well dressed, blonde and blue-eyed, and each one had a bicycle. I don't remember them pulling their bikes over the yellow bars, which would have been kind of difficult. The man held out a small rectangular object in his hand. I couldn't recognize it. He said, "The next time you hear this, you'll know it's us." I'm assuming this was the instrument sound that was coming from the tunnel. Then they got on their bicycles and rode away. Sam and I talked about that incident for a long time. We, of course, corroborated everything that happened with one another, and I'm pretty certain that if he was not there then I would have discounted most of this incident as imagination. The very first day we moved to Mobile, my mom drove by that ditch. My brothers and I immediately looked at one another and knew we were gonna go skate there. When we got to the ditch later that day, we were surprised to find scattered animal parts on the floor of the ditch. These were parts of a fairly large animal, like a large dog. The parts had no skin or hair and no blood whatsoever, they were just muscle and sinew and bone. Strangely, a lot of kids in that town told me that they were devil worshippers. I'm not a religious person, but I do find it odd that an unusual number of people in that town seem to be fascinated with the dark side of the occult, even at a young age. Regarding the figures in the tunnel, they looked just like blonde-haired, blue-eyed humans. Their eyes did not glow when out in the daylight. The man and woman looked to be in their mid-30s, the children were a boy and 2 girls, and their ages appeared to range from about 12, the oldest, to 6, the youngest. They were all dressed nice, like a suburban family going to church. Which was obviously weird to see in a sewer tunnel. I paid particular attention to the youngest girl, because I was so confused as to why these people were in that tunnel, especially with a little child that young. She had dark circles under her eyes and I immediately thought to myself, that kid looks like she's on drugs. If you would like my personal opinion, I think that these people were human occultists of some kind, and they were performing a magical ceremony in that tunnel. They were in the middle of this ceremony when we arrived. That is my feeling on the matter.
When I was a kid, I lived in Colorado near a park called Ridgeview Glen Park. I walked by it every day on the way to school. I also used to play in it with my brother and his friends. In the middle of a field in the park, there was a large entrance to a storm drain with a pool of water in front of it. I remember once, I was walking by the storm drain and my friend Ben told me a strange story. He said that there was a kid that lived in the neighborhood near the park named Steve, and one winter, he fell into the pool of water in front of the storm drain. Since it was winter, lots of snow melted and the pool was very deep. Anyway, apparently Steve drowned and now his ghost haunts the park and the storm drains, and the locals apparently call him Scuba Steve. I did my research, and while I haven't found anybody named Steve, it's not unheard of for people to drown in storm drains in the area. Also, when I was a kid I asked Ben's dad and he said the story was true, but he could have just been humoring us. Ben was far from trustworthy. He told us stupid lies all the time, so at first I thought it was nothing more than just a story. However, there were 3 strange occurrences that I witnessed that made me think there might be something more to this story. Here's the first occurrence. Me and my friend Elliot used to explore the storm drains during summer when the water was shallower. We were obsessed with a show called Lost Tapes on Animal Planet, where each episode tells a story about a different cryptid. There was an episode about a lizard man that lives in storm drains and sewers, so we frequently wandered through the sewers to search for a lizard man. One day, we actually found something. We were walking through and, in the dark, we thought we could see the silhouette of a person. We cautiously stepped closer and the silhouette began running towards us. Naturally, the 2 of us hightailed it out of there. The second occurrence also happened to me and Elliot. One day, we checked out the entrance to the drain and found that the water at the bottom was far too deep for us to go inside. Instead of going in, we entertained ourselves by throwing rocks into the water and mocking Scuba Steve. We called it whatever childish insults we could think of, when all of a sudden the water started violently splashing. We stared in awe for a couple of seconds, and to make sure it wasn't just a rock we threw splashing, and when it continued, we fled in terror. It was as if some invisible being was splashing around in the water. The third occurrence happened at Ben's birthday party. It was late at night and me, my brother, Ben, and our other friend Preston were all begging Ben's parents if we could go out and search for Scuba Steve. His parents said it was too late at night, but eventually we convinced them to let us go. We went down to the park and there was a kid there. I don't remember his appearance very well, but I do remember that he was very skinny, and though it was dark, thanks to the street light nearby, I could tell that he had dirty blonde hair. We ended up playing with the kid for a while, completely forgetting about our search for Scuba Steve, when eventually, the kid said that he needed to go home. We said goodbye and he left. Then, something that I find very strange happened. The kid, rather than going down the sidewalk, walked into the field and into the storm drain. That was the only time I witnessed what could have been Scuba Steve. My friends told stories, but since they were children and some of them weren't very trustworthy, I didn't include them. Another strange thing about the area, however, was that the animals and wildlife acted very strangely. More specifically, the foxes, which are usually very shy animals, were very aggressive here. They even chased us from time to time. I'm no expert on the paranormal, so I don't know if ghosts usually affect the behavior of animals or anything like that, but I felt like it was worth mentioning. Anyway, that's my story.
I was in Pahang at that time, celebrating my sister's wedding. All my family, relatives were present to celebrate this occasion. The band played traditional songs and compangs, though it's still a blast. During the wedding night, when the ceremony or sanding was over, there was still some singing and feasting. It was held at a grass field not far from the bridegroom's house. It was then when my mum told me to accompany one of my aunts to the toilet. I had always admired this aunt, only 25 at the time, so tall and pretty. I had noticed almost all the guys, including the bridegroom and me, feast their eyes on her. So obviously I was happy to accompany her. You know, in kampungs, the toilet is always at the back of the house, and it's really scary at night. While my aunt was doing her business, I secretly started to smoke, looking at the surroundings. It is quite far from the crowd, but I can still hear the faint sound of music. It was very peaceful here until I heard my aunt scream from the toilet. I thought she saw me smoking, and I threw the butt immediately, cursing myself. She then ran out of the toilet, her baju kurung rolled up to the waist. What I saw behind the toilet wasn't a beauty though. It looks like a man, but his whole body is black and shiny. It seems his whole body was covered in oil. It darted away in a strange manner among the bushes, and in a split second was out of sight. Before it ran out of view, though, I noticed its face, which I will never forget. It had red eyes, and they were staring at me just before it took off. This thing certainly wasn't human, as no human moves like that. It reminded me of a spider, but with 2 legs. My aunt ran to me, catching her breath. I myself was scared, but still I consoled her. We then went back to the crowd, and I told my mother about it. She too was shocked, but one of the ladies on the bridegroom's side who overheard the conversation said it was an Orang Mini, the oily man. The Orang Miniac is a ghost story, and this was no ghost.
Our family lived in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and our home was located 1/10 of a mile from the major town street. Our house was located in the forest, and our property bordered a state forest. I was 11 or 12 at the time. The forest was dense with well-worn hiking paths. Some had been logging roads at one time. One was larger as it had once been a rock quarry road. The remains of the quarry were located on our property. A quarter-mile from the quarry was a convergence to 2 creeks. One was Wolf Creek. The convergence point once had a 5-foot stone dam that was blasted years before my time due to waterborne disease outbreaks. The town dumped its sewage into the smaller creek. Beyond the convergence of the creek, it descended several large waterfall systems into the New River Gorge. When waters were low, a large flat rock creek bed was exposed, and we played in it as kids. Several of us were wrapped up in the Dungeons and Dragons craze, were enamored by heavy metal music, and teetered on the edge of occult interests. Nothing too serious. Boys of their time and place. During one late afternoon, I proclaimed upon the top of a rock outcrop over the creek bed that I was calling forward a great spirit of the deep forest. Nothing happened. We continued playing until dusk, parted ways, and returned home. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Perhaps related. My experience with Mothman began that week and lasted just less than a month. I did not speak of it or share with others for nearly 15 years. I was afraid that speaking of it would somehow cause it to come back around. I will spare you the minor details, but need to share the only backstory that matters. A few years earlier, I played with a girl my age and her younger brother. They had a grand 3-story wooden home in our neighborhood. It was a historic house. A mansion by local standards. We entered her home one night after searching out fireflies in the front yard. When we walked through the foyer to the main staircase to the 2nd floor, I looked to my right across a large sitting room where there were sets of large windows. Outside the windows was a large hardwood about 75 years old. I saw 2 large red eyes. Large, I stopped. The girl and her brother were already a fourth the way up the stairs, and I was standing still and mesmerized. I said, "There are 2 red eyes in your tree."
That's a ghost. He has red eyes, looks like an old man, sits in the tree and stares at us sometimes.
I asked if they ever called the police. She said no. She said her mom told them not to look at it and ignore it. Their mom often seemed drained and depressed. I was glad I did not have old creepy men sitting in trees around our house. It stayed with me. Back to my main story. I immediately felt that I was being watched at all times. The primal feeling of prey being stalked. It did not matter if I was in my house, woods, walking to the park, day and night. There were scratches at my 2nd floor window, but no trees. Deep fear of getting out of bed. Paralyzing fear. Many sleepless nights. I tried to share strange things that were going on with my parents. They had no interest. I would wake them up at night and ask them to search the house, check the doors, etc. They were annoyed. They did agree to keep the floodlights on surrounding the house. My dog was acting strange. Normally a brave dog, not scared by bear, not man, nor bigger dog, was a mess while this was going on. I called one of my friends that was there with us when we were playing and asked him to come over. That it was very important. Told him I would only speak with him in person about it. He did, and I learned he too was having a series of strange and frightening events. He felt we needed to stick together and tell no one, as they would think we were nuts. Needless to say, I did spend a lot of time at his house located in a non-wooded neighborhood. The stuff going on at his house was just as bad, knocking on multiple walls during the day. 1,000 birds on the power lines outside his home. The fear of being watched and followed. He was irritated with me as he felt it had been my fault. One night I mustered the courage to go to my bedroom window and look out on the backyard. A being crossed from the shadows of the house side across the yard and into the floodlight-lit area just a bit, stopped and looked over its shoulder at me at an upward angle as I was in an elevated position. First, this thing was 8 or 9 feet tall. Had its giant wings pulled in across its back so that it looked like a cloak. It looked straight ahead again and seemed to glide across the yard in a standing position. It did not have traditional legs, and the legs came together into a very strange point, as though its stance could not support its mass, yet they did. It used no stride. It was not human. Many years later, when the film came out, I was amazed. The static on the phone, headaches, etc. At the time of the events, I assumed it was a demon. Mothman was not a term I knew. I never saw it spread its wings or fly. I did have the feeling it was above me. A bird's eye view. The damn thing was silent, as I have the hearing of a fruit bat. I had a panic attack that night, cold sweats, and felt very alone. I got down on my knees and prayed in a way I never had and never have since. There was one wise old man who cut our grass and acted as a handyman when the mines closed from time to time. He liked me. Gave me a lot of advice. Told me stories. He had 3 girls and no boys. My dad liked to do his own work but pitched the fellow work because he was a good guy. He was working on our mower when I broached the subject briefly. He stopped what he was doing, stood up, took me by the shoulders, and looked me in the eyes. He said, "I know what you are talking about. It is the thing we do not talk about in this town. It is called Mothman, and even talking about it can bring him around." That was it. I live in Atlanta now, and during 2005 I finally shared the whole story with my wife of 6 years. Within a week I was in the back courtyard and one swooped. The wingspan and speed was awesome. It perched, not like a bird, 70 yards away at about 70 feet and watched me. No red eyes during the middle of the day and blended well. They do not weigh much but are crazy large, intelligent, and not human. It moved on within a week. While they can communicate telepathically, so can I when you lock minds with it. I let it know that it was out of its element in a city like Atlanta, that I had no fear and that I would end it should it mess with my family and property. Not sure I could. But I was a man at that time and had very little patience and refused to succumb to fear. They are most curious about us. They don't think like humans. Don't have the same values and motivations. There were no tragedies associated with my experience. They are voyeurs by nature. I don't think they are physically as strong as a full man. But I can't imagine getting a shot at one.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.